Thank you all for coming to the end of the semester lecture and reception for the Center for South Asia. And I'm sorry about the competing LCA luncheon that was scheduled at the same time, but hopefully we can get beyond that and have a great time here and not have it happen in the future. But anyway, before we get into our special speaker today, I would like to make some announcements about people who've had awards and completed important degrees. We have an undergraduate certificate which is given out by the Center for South Asia, and this year we have 5 recipients of the undergraduate certificate. And I believe the people who are here today are Krista Rasmussen. Is she here? Not yet? You can clap anyway. Aaron Sheridan, is he here? Yeah, come on down. Good. You get your certificate. Thank you very much. And we also have Ariel Wheeling. The 2 people who are not present, Julia McNerney and Roshni Patel, we can give them a clap anyway. So. I also want to announce the summer FLASs, the language fellowships that have been given to students. We have Adam Auerbach, Sarah Beckham, Joy Johnson, Renu Paul, and Ted Water have been given a summer FLAS. Congratulations. For the academic year FLAS, this is for next year, we have Nick Abbott, Sarah Calhoun, Joy Johnson, Julia Lynch, and Heather O'Connor. So congratulate them. Julian. I forgot the N. Julian Lynch, not Julia. Sorry. It's that nasalization, you know, Julian. Julia is a famous monastery in Pakistan. We'll hear about it. And then we have academic year FLASs for the first time undergraduate awards for Anna Johnson and Sharon Stump. Are they here? Great. Congratulations. What else did I have to announce on that? Okay. I also want to especially thank our Center for South Asia staff for a very, very busy and hectic year getting grant proposals in and lots of other projects and preparing for next year already. So first of all, I'd like to thank Lita Duperon. Please. Rachel Weiss. Everybody knows Rachel. Neha, please stand up. Mike, where's Mike? Here, right here. Matt, is he here? No. Don't clap. And Salima, thank you very much. We also have staff who are working on the SOSLI program. Laura, Ian, Salima, and Emily, who's a new addition to our group, who we want to thank all at one time. Not because they're less, it's just we got to get on. So, okay, anything else that I forgot? Lolita or Rachel? All right, so today's talk is, we're very fortunate to have with us Luca Olivieri, from Rome. He's actually living in New York now. His wife works at the UN. So it's a great way to have him here for the next 4 years, or till 2012, 3.5 years, whatever. So I'm hoping that he can come back here and give us some more talks and maybe organize a panel at the South Asia Conference. And I'm happy to say he just joined the American Institute of Pakistan Studies as an individual member, so I can get him involved in many other ways. Dr. Olivieri has been working on Gandhara studies and the archaeology of Gandhara since he became involved in the mission in 1987. So the Italian Archaeological Mission to Swat is one of the most important long-term archaeological projects that's been happening in Pakistan. I think the earliest founder was Tucci, who started that back before I was born, before any of us were born. And one of the things that Luca has recently done is finish an edited volume in honor of Tucci, who was a famous scholar, Italian scholar, connecting the areas of the Northwest and Central Asia and South Asia, and really promoting the study of the archaeology and history of that region. So he has focused in Rome, but has worked a lot in Pakistan and hoping to spend more time in Pakistan with new projects that he was just telling me about in setting up training programs for Pakistani archaeologists and scholars to work in Swat. And those of you who were here a couple weeks ago, we had Sultan-e-Rome, who is a scholar from Swat, and we were just talking about hopefully that area settling down enough that these kinds of projects can start. Dr. Olivieri has published several edited volumes on Swat and also in honor of the archaeology of that region by leading Italian scholars. He's written outlines on the modern history of Swat. He's written articles on the geoarchaeology of Swat, the landscapes, military forts, his excavations at Barikot or Barikot from 1987 to 2006. He has also worked on the Buddhist rock art and the Buddhist sculptures of Swat. Swat is one of the richest areas of Pakistan for a long history of human habitation, stretching back to the Paleolithic period and continuing on to the present. And the Italian mission has been the leading group of scholars working in that area to try to coordinate that. So please welcome Dr. Luca Olivieri, who's going to talk about the archaeology of Swat today. Thank you.
Slide is okay for slides. Yes. So first of all, let me thank the Center of South Asian Studies of the Wisconsin University and Director Mark Inoya for giving me this honor and the opportunity of presenting this today during your lunch, our activity. So this lecture is going to illustrate three different aspects of the Italian archaeology in Swat. First of all, as we will have a sketch outline of the research carried out between 1956 and 2000. Second, the latest main research. And third, the present situation and future project. The Italian mission was the first foreign permanent archaeological institution to work in Pakistan, led by ISIAO, Istituto Italiano per l'Africa e l'Oriente, the former ISMEO. It is also the longest-standing foreign mission in Southwest Asia after the French mission in Afghanistan. The mission has been continuously active in Swat since 1956, when the region was part of the autonomous princely state, the Yusufzai state of Swat, that only in 1969 merged into Pakistan. Since the beginning, the mission has worked in close collaboration with the Department of Archaeology and Museums, Government of Pakistan. The activities of the mission in Swat, first directed by Giuseppe Tucci, then by Domenico Faccenna, Maurizio Taddei, Pier Francesco Caglieri, and myself, can be subdivided in four major phases. From 1956, for almost a decade, 10 years, to 1966-67, the mission focused on the archaeology of the Buddhist sacred areas and monasteries, with three excavations which can be still considered the best documented and published projects in Kandahar archaeology: Butkara, Pan, and Saidu Sharif. From 1966 to 1983, the focus turned towards prehistory and protohistory. In 1966, while the excavation at the Saitu Stupa was going on, other teams started large-scale excavations of the late Bronze Iron Age graveyards of Katelai, Godgara, Butkara II, and Loeban. Soon after, the excavations at the protohistoric settlement of Aligrama start, as well as the rock shelter of Galigay. After the end of the Galigay works, Giorgio Stacul published the first sequence of protohistoric Swat from Neolithic to Iron Age. From 1984 onwards, the mission focused on historic settlements. After the first excavation projects at Udegram and at Paramà in the early 60s, in 1984, Caglieri started a new excavation at the site of Barikot, Birkot Gwandei. Here, the late Bronze Age and Iron Age occupation layers were already known after some test trenches dug by Stacolo. There followed a rush of work, with 9 seasons of excavation, the last one in 2006, and 3 years of survey. The archaeological layers discovered so far span from protohistory to Islamic times, from mid-second millennium BCE to the 15th century CE. But Barikot is also exposed to an alarming building activity and to the continuous threat of the illegal diggers, and a more comprehensive protection plan is needed. Excavations and survey brought to the discovery of a fortified Indo-Greek city with its Acropolis, founded in the end of the 2nd century BCE, with the important Saka-Parthian, Kushan, and Kushano-Sasanian phases. A late historic dwelling area was also documented at the foot of the Acropolis. Protohistoric and early historic layers were also unearthed on the Acropolis itself. And lastly, again on the Acropolis, we uncovered the remains of a Turkish Brahmanical temple, the first ever documented in Swat. Soon after, in 2004, the remains of a coeval religious center were located in the nearby area of Maniar. And finally, in 2006, we documented on the top of the Shakot Pass, south of Barikot, a podium of a Brahmanical temple already noticed by Fouché in 1896. Another important project was the excavation of a Ghaznavid mosque at the foot of the Rajagira Mount in Udegram. The project started after the finding on the very spot of an Arabic inscription referring to the foundation of a mosque by a general of Mahmud of Ghazna in the 11th century. Udegram is the 3rd oldest mosque in Pakistan and the oldest in the northern part of the country. The 5 excavation campaigns were carried out from 1985 to 1999, alternately with those at Barikot under the direction of Umberto Cerrato. However, the Buddhist archaeology was not forgotten, and Facenna launched in 1987 an extensive survey program focusing on the late Buddhist rock sculptures. The project initially started in the valleys where these sculptures were first noticed, Saidu and Jambil, but eventually covered the entire Swat Valley, Dir and Buner, and neglected areas such as Puran. At the end of the project in 2006, more than 200 rock sculptures were documented and studied. Besides the excavations at Barikot, the restoration and study of the Ghaznavid Mosque at Udegram, new projects followed. The archaeological map of the Swat Valley is a project initiated by Domenico Facenna in the 60s, but started in a new form in 2000. It is aimed to create a GIS-based map for the vast archive of discoveries and field records collected in an unsystematic fashion in 50 years of research, as well as for new evidence from the field. The valleys facing Barikot, where Giuseppe Tucci had made his fundamental observations on the ancient history and archaeology of Swat, were explored first. The first phase started in 2000 and was followed by 3 other campaigns in 2004, 2005, and 2006. As the activity started in 2000, it was stopped for 3 years because of security reasons. In April 2001, few weeks after the Bamiyan Buddhas were destroyed, a group of local Taliban heavily damaged the excavated podium of the Brahmanical temple of Barikot Top Hill. In the surveyed area, about 200 square kilometers, we recorded about 400 new sites. There were new important Buddhist areas, as well as a substantial series of prehistoric, protohistoric, pre-Buddhist or not Buddhist sites. In particular, a monumental black Misharad rock inscription was found in the site of Talang in the Kota Valley, and more than 100 rock carving sites and 49 pente shelters were discovered. The 2006 campaign should have been devoted to the survey of the Saidu and Jambil valleys, a little bit north of Barikot, a goal which was only partly accomplished, as we are going to see. In future, together with the central part of the valley, we plan to explore the northeastern sectors of the Swat region and its mountain passes to Candia and the Indus. Here we will try to connect the Swat sequences with those of the Upper Indus. An important discovery by Giuseppe Tucci in 1955 was the carved rock wall of Gogdara first. At the beginning, it displayed only few carvings, which number nevertheless increased when the deposits covering its base were dug. The Gogdara carvings may be dated between the Bronze Age and the beginning of the historic age, 16th, 4th century BCE. Retouches and overlaps point to main carving faces, one with large, wide animal figures, and the other one with carts, herds of horses, and standards. The two faces are also stylistically different. Large animal figures are often bitriangular, while later images, as a rule, are linear and schematic. After a decade of new intensive research, we realized that Gogdara, although still representing a key site for rock art in Swat, was not an isolated example. In Kandak and Kota, this artistic or graphic and at least in part ritual tradition is also present. It started probably in the Bronze Age and survived the transformations brought about by Buddhism, declining only in the later historical phases. 49, as I told you, 49 painted shelters have been discovered so far and documented in Lower Swat. These shelters are usually large gneiss boulders metamorphosed and eroded by glacier action, located in rugged and hardly accessible places, but mostly clearly visible from a long distance. The cavities may barely have been sufficient to shelter more than 1 to 3 persons at the same time. The figures are painted in dark red ochre, and the more recent one in orange, and more rarely in white or yellow. The most ancient shelters, those of Sargasar and Kakai Kandao, display highly symbolic compositions based on associations, oppositions, and combinations of iconographic signs. This language seems to be typical of illiterate communities that nevertheless possess a complex mythopoetic and lexical heritage. While in the older painted shelters the horse is absent and agriculture might be emphasized, in the later examples, warriors are constantly associated with horse riding. The horse was possibly the totemic symbol of the Assakenoi, or at least their eponymous animal. The Assakenoi were the people that were the communities that Alexander met in Swat at the end of the 4th century. In summary, in the Bronze Age and possibly before 14th century BCE, paintings might represent agricultural rituals and wild animals, perhaps depicting specific divinities. Heroes holding shields appear for the first time. In the long transition to the Iron Age, with the well-known extensive graveyards, warriors and pastoral figures predominate, together with the representation of the horse. In the face of contact with the Buddhist cultural domination, we witness the expression of a possible ideological contrast. In a later phase, painted shelters share the ideographical lexicon of the Brahmanical religious symbology until medieval warfare scenes take the main place. After the results of the first phase of the archaeological map were crossed with the evidence from the excavation at Barikot, the general picture of the area became a little bit different. The connection between Buddhist monasteries and agriculture became evident. However, the diffusion of Buddhism looked less pervasive and coherent than previously thought, with new actors on the scene. The authors of the painted shelters were possibly the witness of a world in transformation where a popular religious background, certainly not Buddhist, appears stronger than we thought before. This is what Tucci referred to when he wrote of the revival of the Aboriginal cults in the late ancient history of Swat. Even the discovery of dozens of wine presses, tanks dug out of large granite boulders, were very similar to the other artifacts found in Chitral and neighboring areas, represent a new challenge. They might suggest that Swat was part of a great Kafiristan, as hypothesized by Yetmar and others, or, a new hypothesis under study, enhance the role of wine and winemaking in the frame of the social economic life of the Buddhist communities. The ethnographical study of the traditional voodoo materials is also an old interest of our mission. We felt the need of verifying the present-day state of this important craft activity, surveying several workshops and craft centers. The most active workshops were found where trade is best organized, like in the Kwazakela and Madian area. Where woodworking is still carried on, there survives an interest for traditional wooden architecture, and with this the desire to preserve the traditional buildings, which without the necessary maintenance would soon be destroyed by dampness and ravages of time. Ultimately, woodworking creates in the local communities a feeling of a cultural identity. Further study will help to contribute to the conservation and sustainable recovery of the once rich wooden architectural heritage of Upper Swat. In 2006, the mission celebrated its jubilee. The event was marked by a special issue of the Xiao Journal East and West, and by 4 symposia in Islamabad, Rome, Milan, and Trieste, and a photographic exhibit, Valleys of Memory, held in several cities of Pakistan and Italy. In 2006, our teams were very busy in the field, not only in Swat, but also in other areas of northern Pakistan. 1 year later, the security conditions in Swat had worsened so much that after the South Asian Archaeology meeting of 2007, in agreement with the Department of Archaeology, we decided to temporarily stop our excavation service and study program. A more limited project, including study and limited service, was hastily planned. In 2007, particularly after the Red Mosque case had inflamed the frontier region, the situation in Swat became particularly difficult. Suicide attacks and roadside bombs were frequent. However, when we left the residence of the mission in the early days of September 2007, we weren't aware that the residence was going to be closed for a period far longer than usual. Everybody knows that the first large-scale military operations Pakistani military operations started after the declaration of the state of emergency by General Musharraf at the beginning of November 2007. However, operations were then limited to the area of Makta, Kwazakela, and Shangla. In January 2008, the military operations were said to be successfully concluded. After few weeks of silence, the insurgency groups set up a furious counter-reaction. Religious ceremonies, as well as civilian targets like political parties, markets, and shops, were associated with military objectives in an endless chain of attacks. In February 2008, the Swat Archaeological Museum, built with the contribution of our mission in 1963, was severely damaged when the nearby Mingora Hostel, a student facility turned into military barracks, was partly destroyed by a powerful explosion. Even the mission's residence, which lies at 1 kilometer from the spot, was lightly damaged. In April 2008, we made a short visit for inspecting the mission's premises and the conditions of the archaeological sites. Swat was under military control, but still unsafe. In fact, 10 months later, the display collection of the Swat Museum was transferred by the Department of Archaeology and the Army to the Taxila Museum premises. The Swat Museum became then a facility of the Army headquarters in Saidu. Later on, in spring 2009, a controversial religiously oriented reform of the local judicial system, known as a Shariat resolution, was signed by the President of Pakistan. Actually, this reform never entered into force since it was eventually refused by the Swati Taliban. This was the most confusing moment in 2009 when the Taliban were openly patrolling main roads and centers and imposing their justice. The army decided not to interfere. In the apparent calm during the 60 days of the Taliban rule, smuggling of antiquities developed without control. If Udegram was effectively spared, the lower area of Barikot suffered a heavy looting activity. The same occurred in other areas in Swat and Dir, and we will see soon the results in the antiquary market and in the new acquisitions by private collections. But the reach of the government was at its lowest point, and there were nobody in Swat, civil or police authorities, to report the plundering. A deep infiltration of Taliban commandos in the neighboring area of Buner became a major news in the international press. Headlines like "Taliban are 60 miles from Islamabad" communicated the distorted image of a capital city under siege to the whole world. The army reacted and in May 2009 launched a large-scale offensive. 2 months later, the operations were successfully concluded. This heavy offensive caused the largest movement of displaced people in the recent history of the region. About 2 million refugees left Swat in the hottest period of the year to be gathered in dozens of camps arranged by the government in the plains east of Peshawar. From 2006 onwards, our local staff had continued to carry out ordinary conservation work of the archaeological sites under the mission's responsibility. Barikot with the entire area of its hill and the excavated Ghaznavid mosque at Udegram. Contacts were first maintained through emails, and when internet points were banned by the local Taliban, we communicated through telephone calls and briefing in Islamabad. Besides conservation and maintenance work at Barikot and Udegram, sites like the Talang inscription and the most important rock painting sites were regularly monitored. Reports written in Pashto and English were regularly sent to the Department of Archaeology and to Rome until February 2009. But when the army operation started in May 2009, all these activities were suspended. Barikot and Udegram fell on the front line. The hill of Barikot was considered the most important checkpoint of the valley and hosted a large heavy artillery and transmission center. Our watchkeepers were dislodged, but they never left the valley. The sites were under custody until the last minutes before the fights started and immediately after the clashes were over. And even during the battle for Mingor and Saido, in spite of clear instructions from Rome to vacate the mission, our premises in Saido were never abandoned. After the end of the military operation, maintenance of our archaeological sites is being supported by the Pakistan Army in its program of reconstruction of the civil infrastructure. During the Swat crisis, we took advantage of the forced inactivity to match up with the publication task, and several final reports were published or completed. After an East and West 2006 special volume representing the state of the art in Swat archaeology and the first report on the archaeological map of the Swat Valley project, in 2007 Domenico Faccenna and Anna Filigenzi published this volume. This is the repertory of terms for cataloging of the Gandhara sculptures. One of the two manuscripts Domenico Faccenna left before his parinirvana, the second is a huge volume on the Butkara, Pan, and Saidu Sharif sculptures, is going to be published this year. It presents all the great stupas of the Swat Valley, from Top Dara to Absapchina to Loeban and others, each with its complete graphic documentation. This report is invaluable because some monuments are now totally destroyed, like Loeban, and most have been heavily damaged by illegal diggings. Moreover, Ilaria Scerrato has published the volume Hood Art from the Swat Valley. a general report on the ethnography of wood carving in the region. The mission is going to publish in spring 2011 a comprehensive study on the early archaeology in Swat from the era of Major Dean, 1895, to the surveys carried out by Horolstein till the Barger and Wright surveys in 1938. The final report on the Swat painted shelters will be soon published in the series of the Heidelberger Akademie des Wissenschaften, Materialien zur Archäologie der Nordgebiete Pakistans, and a final study on the late Buddhist rock sculptures is also expected in 2011. A volume on the Barikot interim report series on the stone objects and a study on the Ghaznavid Mosque of Udegram will also follow quite soon. Other final reports, in first place the dig of Aligrama by Sebastiano Tusa and others, are an urgent need. A regular updating of the mission's activity and publications is available at the mission website. In the first years of the 20th century, and before and immediately after the establishment of both the Militant Agency by the British and the Yusufzai state of Swat, the activity of the illegal diggers and art traders was at its peak. Several European collections took advantage of the situation, but during the last years as well, the activity of illegal excavations has exponentially increased, while all the scientific fieldwork activities were suspended. In recent past, from usually inaccessible regions of Pakistan like Bajaur, but also from Dir and Swat, loads of new pieces were dug. Some were presented in academic context, and this may raise some old questions on the boundary between science and ethics. Unfortunately, at present, the archaeology of Gandhara regions seems to be still at its infancy. It does not match the standards of other fields of the archaeological studies in Pakistan and elsewhere, say the Roman or medieval archaeology, let alone prehistory. First, in Gandhara archaeology there are no boundaries amongst specialized fields, with few possible exceptions. Numismatic, field archaeology, epigraphy, art history, everything is mixed up. Art historians, epigraphists, and numismatics experts may become field archaeologists or the other way round. Consequently, the methodological standard of the excavation and surface research is very low. The frequency of stratigraphic excavation is absolutely rare, and as a final consequence, the number of the published or displayed objects discovered in a stratigraphic context is nearly irrelevant. For these and other reasons, the mission and the Department of Archaeology conceived, already in summer 2007, a large-scale project meant to support both the improvement of methodology and the protection of sites. We will start from Swat, perhaps to be considered an happy island in a depressing ocean. This project, called ACT, Archaeology Community Tourism, became even more urgent after the Swat crisis. At the present, the project is under the last step of a long bilateral evaluation process, and if approved, is expected to start in fall 2010. ACT is a 3-year project which will be financed in the framework of the debt swap program signed by the Italian and Pakistani government. It is focusing on three main actions: certified training, rehabilitation reconstruction of the Swat Museum, restoration and conservation of the main stupa in the site of Saidu Sharif. Trainings will be organized in 3 campsites, Barikot, Udegram Mosque, and Saidu Sharif, and are meant to train local workers, archaeology officers, and students in the following fields: stratigraphic excavation, graphic documentation, first aid restoration, maintenance and management of excavated archaeological areas, and survey as well. A total of 230 local workers, together with archaeological officers and university students, will be trained. The Beacon House University School of Visual Art, Lahore, and the Taxila Institute of Asian Civilization of the Qaid-Azam University, Islamabad, are the first two university institutions involved. Each local trainee will receive for his training period a wage equivalent to the Italian mission salary for skilled excavators, and insurance and other minor benefits. The best trainees will be selected for different advanced levels as restorers in the Said Sharif restoration camp, as stratigraphic excavators, as watchkeepers, as archaeological tourist guides. Starting from the first semester, a final total of 30 watchkeepers will be employed in 11 selected sites protected under Antiquity Act, but lacking of a proper custody. For the first 3 years, their salary will be paid by the project, but after, they will be taken in charge as a permanent employees by the Department of Archaeology. The selected group of archaeological guides will be organized in an association cooperative which will be supported by the project through marketing consultancies, organization of events, and so on, in order to start up its activity. And the association will also receive an official recognition from the provincial and federal ministries of tourism. As a collateral expected result of the project, the Department of Archaeology is committed to find the necessary funds in order to allow the definitive acquisition of the archaeological excavated areas of Barikot and Udegram. And that's all.
Thank you very much for a very enlightening presentation and also future goals for this region. It's a very important region of Pakistan. Are there any questions about any of the sites? Yeah.
You had mentioned that all of the various branches of archaeology they're kind of overlapping. I'm not an archaeologist, but you're saying epigraphy and so the other ones. There isn't any
professional boundaries between them. And
you're saying how this is starting to cause a bit of a degradation of quality of the lab coming out, the work coming out. Could it also in that way help to bring about interesting insights into the work, the caves, the paintings that you're studying that someone who is only in a single discipline wouldn't have noticed? So could there also be benefits to that crossover?
Yes, but as you know, rock art is not the most important discipline in archaeology, as is considered a little bit a secondary discipline. So, notwithstanding the paintings are so amazing, beautiful, and so on, what we can say is just to put a question mark at the end of each and every possible chronological sequence we are trying to build. So, rock art is not the right way in the sense. For this reason, I think that one solution would be, I would say, we are discussing before with Mark, to start as much stratigraphic excavation as possible in order to create a sort of balancing point, I don't know how to say, so in order to compare. You know, really the situation in Gandhara archaeology, historic archaeology particularly, is very depressing. I remember that some years ago an American scholar published a very interesting work on the Gandhara architecture. And this book was targeted by a lot of criticism because of this and that. I remember having wrote a review on that article, on that book, saying that whatever we can say against this book is because of our responsibility. What can a person say about the evolution of architecture in Gandhara when you have only 3 stratigraphically excavated sites in a peripheral area of Gandhara, like Swat is? So in general, we are dealing with excavations done or digged in the 30s, in the 20s, when the the archaeology, especially colonial archaeology, notwithstanding what happened a little bit later when Mortimer Wheeler started his training camps in Mohenjo-Daro and in Taxila. But before, at the time of Sir John Marshall, the excavations were like in Italy in the 30s. So if you go to Gandhara and you are studying Gandhara architecture, monastic, let aside monastery, because we have only one monastery excavated in the old Gandhara. I mean, maybe there are others, but as far as I know, there is one which was really well excavated and published in due time. So the life in the monastery is just is not only neglected, but also it is also a sort of a totally unknown aspect of the Gandhara archaeology. As far as concerned Gandhara sculptures, we are still having labels in the museums with this bracket chronology, one third century. That's unbelievable now, after 80 years of excavations of different types of different methodologies and so on. But especially after 50 years, after the World War II, when archaeology started being, I would say, something different from. But it seemed that in Gandhara, this aspect of the archaeological evolution, so started as much excavation as possible. This is the only solution. And the problem is that, especially in the last 10 years, nobody has carried out anything. Apart, we carried out a small excavation in Barikot, interesting, but smaller than we have done before, and surveys. And from 2006 onwards, nothing, apart from what the legal diggers have been done and put in the market. And the second point is the commitment of the national Pakistani universities in this sense, because they could be the real transfer of a newly oriented archaeology as far as concerned Gandhara, because we are still considering Gandharan objects, Gandhara sculptures are as art history oriented considered objects, not as objects of archaeological interest. So if you go to the reconstruction of the life, we have to thank to what Chopin has done in the recent years, but more from the texts than from the actual, the real finds, the archaeological finds. I bet, I'm sure, what I'm saying, I'm sure that 90%, 99%, 95%, I don't want to overemphasize the figures, 95% of the Gandhara collection in the whole world are lacking, they are no proper archaeological record. Imagine if you transfer this number to Roman sculpture or classical archaeology, it would be a mess. Would be the meaning would be that this you know what I mean. Sorry, maybe I'm.
So is that condition of you mentioned the early 20th century, all this looting that took place, and a lot of these objects which ended up in academic institutions. Which you said kind of creates these questions about the sciences and ethics and the academy and ethics. And now I think maybe the academy and the archaeology is still involved in this question of ethics now in what you're doing in this volatile region. But can you explain kind of what are the ethical implications or parameters of what your work is and how it's changed from maybe that earlier time?
In the early years of the last century, the situation was different even from the legal point of view.
Yeah.
You know that the concept, the introduction of the term object of archaeological interest was newly was something new in the colonial archaeology, and was introduced for the first time in 1904 by the Antiquity Act number 7 in British India, together with a list of objects that has to be considered are objects of archaeological interest. And then a long series of amendments till 1937, and then to 1942, if I'm not wrong, when the first Custom Act concerning the archaeological objects was issued in British India. So there were a long list of written complaints by the archaeological, by civil officers in British India, especially in the area between, along the border between the settled area, I mean the real British India administered districts, and the borders, the tribal areas and so on. Because there were a lot of objects passing through the borders, going down to Karachi or whatever, I don't know where, and then exported to Europe. And one of the main hubs at the beginning was Italy. And from Italy was sent to London, to Paris, to Germany, and what else. If you compare these evidences to the creation on the other side of the globe, the creation of the main collections in Europe, you will see that there is a strict connection between the two aspects. Now we have in Pakistan, as elsewhere, like in the US, in Europe, and so on, we have a strict regulation. Maybe must be mutually, I don't know how to say, Mark, if you can help me, maybe
Bilateral agreements between countries have to be established.
Between source countries and, but there is a strict regulation. In the Act 1975, the Antiquity Act is clear. Within 7 days after each discovery, accidental discovery, wherever it happens, the Director General of Antiquities in Pakistan has to be informed, or one of the top officers has to be, or the local officer has to be informed. And they find to be fined, in case the person could be fined with 3 years jail. So this is what the law says. And this is the real situation. The real situation is that it's clear that the antiquity trade is the third most important trade in the world, and I met somebody in Pakistan who told me that, you know, sir, that if I was trading with drug, I would gain less money, and really less money, and the risk would be higher in terms of. So this is another aspect. A third aspect, I'm leaving aside for a moment the responsibility of archaeology, field archaeology. The other aspect is that it's normal now, if you go to the scientific publications, international conference and so on, to have a lot of objects which are presented without offering their background from private collections. This lab, the private collection, is covering everything. And that's a point that you can imagine in an international conference in Roman archaeology. If somebody is presenting objects, I think that the audience will be at least a little bit embarrassed. And that's another point. As far as concern the expertise, I mean the standard of the methodology, it's a question of transmitting of knowledge. I believe in the personal transmission of knowledge. Sorry, my command of English is not so smart in order to give you the proper, the right answer in the best English you ever had listening. But Wheeler prepared in the archaeological camps in Taxila and Mohenjo-Daro a good number of Pakistani and Indian archaeologists. Amongst them, for instance, F.A. Khan, who was the first Director General in Pakistan, and Professor Dani. So, both in the university, because Professor Dani was part of the department for a few years, but he joined the academia then. Both in the universities and in the Department of Archaeology, till 1975, 80s, 85, probably, this transmission of knowledge worked well. At a certain moment, it has been interrupted. And the standard of the archaeological excavation dropped down, absolutely down, was very low. No help from the foreign institutions, apart from the institutions involved permanently in some areas, like Mark is doing, is doing in Harappa, and we did in Swat. But in the rest of the country, I mean, especially for Gandhara, because in Gandhara the attraction of the sculptures remains very, 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 very heavy.
Another question back there.
Thank you very much for a very interesting talk, and the work of the Italian mission certainly is inspirational. You mentioned Professor Taxila, who was a visiting professor here in Madison many years ago. And he did conduct excavations in, as you know, in Chutpat, Londonderry, and Bumblebee, and attempted certainly to use more scientific methods. Can you talk about the role of the information he presented? Is there more information that has not been published about those sites?
At that time, Dani has already had a very quick approach towards archaeology. He was involved in different fields in the entire country. He did a lot. But if I have to raise a little, I don't know how you say, not an objection, but was that he was too quick. For instance, the Shaikandari excavation, the excavation in the area of the ancient Pushkalavati, would have been one of the most important excavations ever done in Pakistan as far as concerned early historic settlement. I didn't say anything about the early historic settlement. As far as I know, we have only the Accra excavations done by the British, the Barikot excavation done by us, and then we have to go to the Wheeler excavation in Taxila, nothing more. For the Indo-Greek, for the Kushan, so Shaka Parthian, the Kushan, later Kushan, and Kushan Sasanian period. So he made only 2 seasons in Shakandari, and then he published very quickly a volume of ancient Pakistan. The same was done as far as concerned the excavation in the Buddhist site of Dir in 1968 and 69 in 2 campaigns. And most of these excavations, the Chatpat and Andheri and so on, were conducted by his students, the professors of the Peshawar University, but not by himself personally. The Andheri excavations are really interesting, and the Chatpat one also. If we go to, this is my personal opinion, if we go to Damkot, which is the third area excavated which would be one of the most interesting, since the sacred area was abandoned and occupied by Indushai fortress and so on. The excavation of Damkot are not very well done. So I don't know if I properly answered to your question. In the end, I guess that the efforts made by the University of Peshawar with Professor Dani and the other scholars are really important. But even if we add these excavations to the list of the excavations made by the Italians and by the Japanese in the Swabi Mardana area, we still have a real lack of information in the end. And the total sum is too light. I don't know.
I have another question here.
I understand that those illegal excavations and lootings, they are annoyingly, they represent annoyingly the majority of excavations at Swat and Gandhara, which is very depressing thing. But on the other hand, are there cases that those kind of looting objects have been purchased by museums and states and analyzed afterwards? It is clear that they have totally lost their context, their archaeological and scientific context. So a lot of knowledge has been lost without any trace. But nevertheless, could they still give some new insight scientifically if somebody does kind of detective work for understanding their meaning and negating and so on? And on the other hand, are there also cases that some illegal excavation have led archaeologists to some significant place which they otherwise wouldn't have
discovered. Let me start from the very last part of your question.
Yes.
My experience is that generally is the other way around, where archaeologists go, they are immediately followed by illegal excavations. As far as concerned, I didn't pick up one point. When you say they, you are indicating the Pakistani authorities or the Pakistan.
Well, I'm they or well, I was thinking about, on the other hand, those illegal excavators, those art dealers, and the whole perhaps mafia-based organization behind them. But on the other hand, the states and museums who try to purchase those objects to the museums. That's what I was talking about.
The tendency of the most important museums in the world towards the acquisition is known. One thing that was very interesting, probably the private collections are particularly involved in the last year's trade. One thing I have to say about the Pakistan Archaeology, the Pakistan Department of Archaeology and Museums. They are doing a lot of work, and my experience with them, with the Pakistan Archaeology Department, is highly positive. They are doing what they can do. You know that archaeology is part of the Ministry of Culture. Culture is part of a larger ministry that includes also sport, tourism, and other things. So that's the point. There is a lack of money invested in archaeology in Swat. This is a main problem.
We're going to have to break it off here. If you want to talk, Professor Olivieri will be in this room from 1 to 3 with Joan. Are you having a separate meeting here? Or is it open?
If there are questions from people before.
Yeah. I need to go now, but thank you very much.
Thank you.